All right, well, once I have cut my control surfaces out, I start sanding and prepping for these wipers, and this little thin sanding, it's like a plate. It only has sandpaper on one side, so the other side doesn't scratch anything. And I go up in there and just make sure that the underside of the skin there is really thin and there's nothing bumpy there or anything that, the wipe will crash into the wiper or scratch the wiper up. Here's that little plate I was using to sand. It's just a piece of G10. I have several different types of these. Some of them are, I take a stainless steel ruler, really thin ruler. This is like a piece of, looks like just plate stock. Different sizes. It's like, I think I used 10 or 15 different tools to process this, these wipers. And then, yeah, that's the first thing I do is I'll just go in there and sand the underside of that skin, make sure it's smooth under there and there's no obstructions where the wiper is going to go into the wing. And then I'm facing the vertical, like just the vertical edge. Yeah, so I'll go back and forth in there. It kind of just to clean it up, no chips, and then bevel the underside. Just make sure the underside's like has a slight little bit of a bevel. And then I'm just easing this top edge so there's no chips and it's nice and smooth. And I repeat the process on the aileron side. Just face that off and ease all the edges, make it smooth. And here I have put, normally I would use green tape for this, but since the paint's just falling off of this airplane, I had to break out the old painter's, the blue masking tape, because I don't want to peel any more paint off. But I put a piece of tape across on the wing side, and that'll stay on for the duration of this process, because when I do these wipers and I fold the mylars up in there, there's going to be a little bit of epoxy that gets on the wing right here. So this just keeps junk off the wing. Everything that I'm putting on, I run long. So I let it go hang off the edge. Then I use a razor blade to trim it flush. So there's no like excess tape anywhere at all. It'll just get in the way. This is especially important on the aileron side. I'm going to be putting some double-sided tape on there first, and that needs to be trimmed like perfectly flush with the front edge of the control surfaces. So here I'm unmasking or just releasing the surfaces. I had them like taped to where they're folded down. And notice I have all three surfaces taped end to end, so they're acting as one big flap. And that's how I'll do the wiper. So it'll be one continuous wiper all the way down the wing, and then I'll cut them apart after it's cured. And that center yellow area on the right wing, right almost where my hand is, you want to keep your eye in that area on the aileron, and that's the flap. So on the outboard edge of that flap, right now there's still paint there, but later I like tried to reposition some tape and like it just peeled the paint right off the carbon. Yeah, it's still bothering me. It's so irritating. It may fly the paint right off of this thing. It just is bad. Anyway, notice I'm going around with the air And so one thing that's really important to me is that there's no dust at all in here, because once you start getting any kind of sticky stuff going, it's just gonna get dust all over it. So I vacuumed and vacuumed, and I'm blowing it out with air and making sure this thing is like super clean. Here's the tape I use, and this is actually really good tape. It's only about 3/1000 thick, and it doesn't leave residue. And actually, it's a remarkably good tape. I use it even to hold stuff down to like my MDF spoil board on my router table. Like it works well. So that's what I use. And then I also use 5/1000 clear mylar. That's what's in that roll there. The combination of the tape and this mylar has been the best method I've found to make wipers. It's just the easiest way to go about it for me. So I take that double-sided tape, stick it down to the front edge of the aileron or the control surfaces. But again, I'm leaving it heavy, and then I trim it with a razor blade, and I'm peeling off that cutoff material. So I have a very nice flush edge of the tape and the front of the control surface, and there's no gaps. It's just a nice clean edge, and the tape is completely flush with that edge. So next I'm taking about a 1-inch wide strip of this mylar, and I'm sticking it down to that double-sided tape. Then I'll trim the ends of it, basically to the shape of the end of the wiper. They have to be able to fold in, right? So I'm just cutting the ends flush with the ends of the control surfaces. And once the ends are cut, I'm going to take some green tape and I'm going to stick it just to the mylar, just to the edge of the mylar. Notice the control surfaces are taped to where they're hanging down. They're almost at their maximum limit of travel, and then I'm taping the mylar down tight to the wing up front. And already that's basically, I'm able to see what my wiper is going to look like. That mylar is just thick enough to make a really nice shape without wrinkling. And so I find it easy to work with, easier than tape, than flash tape or any of the other tapes I've tried. So once now remember, the control surfaces are able to still drop down a slight bit, because I'm going to trim this flush with a razor blade on that forward edge of the wing. And once I get through this cut, then the mylar essentially will pop up, right? It's going to be hanging straight up in the air, essentially. And that's the edge that I'm going to end up tucking up under there. And so that's why I need a little bit more room for my control surface to drop down more, so I can back it off a little bit to fold up under that edge. So when they're curing, they'll be at the deflection that they are now, minus just a couple degrees, just to keep the tape up under the edge. So I got rid of that offcut of mylar and the green tape, and I'm going to unmask this so I can move the control surfaces around, and I'm going to just do a dry check. I'm going to put that mylar up under the front skin and make sure everything's going to work out okay. I'm a bit out of practice on these, and I also am not used to making wipers that are this small. And so after using this little yellow spreader, I found later that a thinner piece of G10 sheet actually helped me tuck this in there a little bit better. If you have a larger, thicker control surface, it's easier to tuck this mylar up in there. But nonetheless, it's not all that difficult. But I think if you start at the root and you get the first part of it stuck there, it would help to put a piece of tape right on top of the flap, across the wiper, up onto the front skin or the top of the wing, and hold that so you can't accidentally back it out and have it pop out. And then as you go down the line, you can kind of almost torsionally just twist the control surface and manipulate it a little bit to help you get it tucked as you go down towards the end. So once I'm happy with the fit and the way that the mylar looks and everything, I'll go ahead and just back it out, let it pop up, and I'll tape those control surfaces as far down as they'll go, which gives me the most access I can get to apply the epoxy onto them. And once I get this one prepped and ready for the epoxy, I'll go ahead and get the other side ready. So here it is, fully prepped, ready for epoxy. I've got the mylars just sticking out, and this is a very thin wing, so I don't have a lot of access to get in there, but you can see I'm using a piping bag here, and that was a mistake. For this small of a wing, I ended up having to switch to a syringe, a little small syringe. I like to use a little, I think it's a 30cc West Systems syringe. They're like my favorite ones. The other thing about this particular set of wipers, usually I'll make the mix, and the mix is epoxy with, I just mix everything in there actually. If I do just micro, I feel like they're not strong enough. And so I add a little bit of filler to that. I add some like West 404 with that. But usually the mix is thin enough to almost self-level. Not quite, because you don't want it to run off the edges of the mylar. So it's thick enough to kind of hold its shape, but thin enough to almost self-level. So it's like it's almost like a thick ketchup or something like that. But on this wing, I wanted to do both in the same session, right? I didn't want to have to cure these overnight on one side of the wing and then switch it and do the other side. Because when you cure these, you're supposed to try to cure it upside down with the mylar like on the bottom, to where as the epoxy wants to self-level, it's kind of, sitting in the mylar, and that creates kind of a uniform thickness for the wipers. But I went a little thicker because I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to run, because once I did one side, if I wanted to set up and do the other side, well, the other side ends up being like in a vertical orientation. And so I had to make 100% sure that the epoxy wasn't going to run down into the wingtips. And that proved to be quite difficult. So I pulled it off, but it was hard to get a uniform thickness for the wipers. It was tedious. But anyhow, got it done. There was a spot in the wiper that was super thin and it cracked, and so I fixed it, and you can't tell it is there. And to fix it, fortunately it didn't break all the way, because I was moving really slow as I'm sanding in the later steps. If you're in there kind of wailing away at it and you do run into something or crash into the wiper, it'll just snap it right off or in half, and that's like not very fixable. But if you're moving really slow and you're lucky, maybe it'll crack and not break all the way, which is what happened on this one. And there was no gaps in the crack, and so I just took some flash tape and I taped right over the mylar, and then I opened everything back up and I just wicked thick CA into the back of the wiper area, and just kind of filled it all in and kicked it off. And after about 20 minutes, I peeled the flash tape off, and it's like non-existent. You can't even see it. And it's stiffened up that thin area of the wiper as well. So, got lucky there. So one of the things I really like about this clear mylar is when you put the epoxy down on it, you can go up underneath and you get a really, it's a clear view, right? You get a perfect view of what your wiper is going to look like when it's cured. You can see any little void, any air bubble, anything like that, and you can work it out with a little stick or a brush or something like that, whatever fits in there. And you literally can see the quality of your wiper, if there's any junk in it, air bubbles, whatever. So I go back and forth, and I make sure that it's 100% nice and looks clean on all the edges up against the control surfaces and all that before I call it good. And then my other goal is to make sure that it's uniform thickness as close as I can get. And also super critical that when you're putting this epoxy on, it stays below the hinge, basically, right? This whole flap section is folded down on the hinge, and you have to stay below that, because if you get epoxy into the hinge, you're going to have to rework the hinge, but it could break the hinge too when you're trying to, fold it around and it's got epoxy in it. So got to take your time. So once I'm happy with the epoxy, the thickness and everything of it, I'll fold the mylars up in there, and here it is tucked in there, and then I have it taped off. There's some smudges on the outside of the mylar, so that you might see a couple things that don't look right on here. It's because it's just excess epoxy that got on the outside. This is the way I cured it overnight. It's kind of different than normal. Usually it's just one surface at a time. And then this is the next morning. I got the wing flipped over. I'm going to start finishing these up. And so I'm going to take a razor blade and I'm going to score. Well, first thing, look, I'm snapping. I'm not flexing them all the way because they'll bind up and crack, but I'm just moving them to make sure they're loose. That they're not stuck. That's bad when that happens. But just making sure that they're kind of loose and free. But there's still a little bit of a flat area of it beyond the radius that was created. And so if you fold it open right now, it'll just probably snap the wipers in half somewhere, in some thin area, it'll snap it in half. So I score it with a razor blade, and I'm kind of holding the surface down, as far down as I can get it where it's starting to bind, but I'm not forcing it beyond that. And I'm slicing with the razor blade, and I probably made 10 passes with the razor blade here. After the first pass or two, the mylar gets cut, and the mylar will start popping up and on its own because it has tension in it, right? It'll pop up and start peeling off the wiper, and you get to see your nice glossy shiny wiper up underneath, for the first glimpse of it. Once I'm through the mylar all the way, I'll go ahead and peel that mylar off and discard that, and then I'll also peel the two-sided tape off the control surfaces as well. And I'll continue scoring until I'm actually cutting through the wiper or almost through the wiper. That way, when I try to open up the control surfaces more, they'll either open, or if they crack, it'll crack right on that score line, right? If there's an area that's so thick I'm not cutting all the way through, I'll know that I'm close to all the way through, and it'll just break right on that little score line. And then whatever's left of that line is the line I sand to for starts, and I usually have to sand beyond that line, making them slightly shorter to clean them up and make them not bind, because if they're too long, you'll lose your up travel basically if it's bottom hinged like this. If this was a bigger wing or thicker airfoil, I typically would take a straight edge and just flush it out with the front edge of this gap, and I'll use a diamond wheel and just cut it like the same way I cut these gaps to begin with, right? And that'll cut right through the wiper, and then you can just open it immediately. But this wing is so thin, I just didn't want to, you cut too deep. Down at the aileron, it's less than an 1/8 inch thick. It's super thin, and so it's messy and a setup that I just didn't want to deal with. It's easier for me to just score this and cut through this by hand. So I just finished that cut, and you can see now I'm starting to get my fingers up under the mylar and pop it up. It's peeling off the epoxy, it's peeling off the wiper. I'm just going down to make sure I'm through cut everywhere. And then I'm going to peel that off. Usually I can just peel it off with the tape and everything all at once, but since this wing, the paint just falls off of it, I had to kind of separate the mylar from the double-sided tape and peel them off separately, so I could peel the tape off like super slow and at the right angle and everything, so I don't peel the paint off. The mylar is a little bit thick, so if your epoxy is fresh and you peel it off at like such an angle where you actually end up creasing the mylar, it can leave marks in the surface of the wiper. So you want to be careful when you're peeling it off that it's smooth and it's not kind of crinkling as you're going down, if that makes sense. So I got the mylar off, and now I'm just pulling the double-sided tape off. If it hangs up right at the edge of the epoxy, I'll stop and try to get it as I go, so I don't have to go back and try to clean that up. If that does happen and you go to try to clean it up and you're kind of rubbing it with your finger, it will leave some residue in it, but rubbing alcohol will take it right off. So now that all the tape's off, I'm taking a square and I'm squaring off, basically I'm scoring the wiper in between the control surfaces. I'm making a score line that's perpendicular to the hinge line. So this swept wing is kind of a little bit different, because normally your end cuts are always perpendicular to the hinge line and you just cut straight forward to cut the end of your wiper apart. But on this one, it's different than that. And I could have done a better job on the root end of the flap when I cut that out. On the next one, I'm going to give it a better shot. And later, towards the end of this video, you'll see what I mean. But anyway, I put a little score mark in the wiper, and then I'm going in. I'm going to go in with a Dremel, a little tiny micro end mill, and I'm going to cut through the wiper right on that line to create the gap and separate the surfaces from one another. And then I'll untape them at the trailing edge, and hopefully if I get close enough, whatever's left there will just snap as I try to move them, in different directions. And then I'll get in there and clean up with some sandpaper or sanding stick or something like that. So I unmasked the trailing edge, and then I'm going in here with an X-Acto on this one and trying to cut away something I probably couldn't get with the Dremel, or was afraid to get too close or whatnot. And on the other side, I think I had to run the razor saw in between the two to get a little bit that's squeezed back in between. So I'm just double checking that they're actually broke free from one another now. There's still excess wiper in the wing. There's still some excess mylar. There's a piece of it right there. I was able to just pull it out. So I folded these down all the way. Now we're free, and I can start sanding and cleaning up those wipers, sanding them down to size, and then just going in there and making sure everything's, nice and clear. Now I've already did the right side, and I'm about to do the left in the video here. These are all of the tools I use. That's a piece of 320 folded in half. There's a little tiny thin file for getting into the wingtips. There's a piece of stainless rule, like a ruler cut in half with paper on it on one side. There's a little pointy, that's a 3-sided diamond for cleaning out the back of the hinge. And then a bunch of little files to get in there and sand anything, epoxy or anything that got on the hinge on the inside of the wing. And then maybe this is a little bit more coarse grit on a thin piece of steel. This doesn't scratch up anything except for the edge, and that's for getting down in between and sanding the hinge on the inside of the wing without grinding anything else but that. So there's like tons of tools for different parts of this job that you have to make, and some work better than others. So not only am I sanding the length of the wiper, but I'm also sanding the thickness of the wiper, because all of these chunks that are on the underside of the wiper will hit and prematurely, and you'll lose travel there. So you can see on the left side, where on the blue area, it was nice and uniform thickness, and on the yellow area it's chunky still. I haven't sanded that yet. Well, once everything's freed up and working, then it's a done deal. These are finished. Oh man, yep, there it is. Besides that, everything worked out pretty good. It was, I felt like I was learning all over again on these. I'm a little out of practice, but they turned out pretty nice. Yeah, dang it. Let's see. So I wanted to show you the end cuts. So on the swept wing, the ends of the control surfaces are cut at an angle, right? That's like the angle that the plane flies. But the end cuts on the wipers are perpendicular to the control surface, or to the hinge line. So you see, if you look, you can see that wiper is cut at a different angle than the surface is. And I should have cut the gap to begin with at the root end of the flap, just like that. And I'm gonna, hopefully on the next one I build like this, I'm gonna be able to get that right, because I just continued that line forward, and I end up having this corner of the wing of that gap opened up for no reason. And you'll see that in a second here. But that's pretty slick. I like how those work. It's just a different geometry, and I'm not entirely used to working on it yet. But these are nice. They're going to work out, and everything's nice and free. So it's time for integration. It's time to put all the servos and batteries in, get it ready to fly at this point. But I'm going to untape this so you can see this corner. So that corner could have been cleaner if you imagine if the wiper was cut square like it is, and that whole corner could have been left on there. So pretty cool. And she's flipped over, about to do some soldering, solder the servos in and get this thing ready to go. And this is a slightly skewed photo. It's like a wide angle or something, because the plane doesn't look like that in person. This makes it look really super wide span and short in the other direction. But yeah, anyway, Time to put some gear in.